So yesterday we had a staff meeting in Oklahoma City, and this story kind of came up. I told a bit of this story, and then when I was driving home from Oklahoma City, I started thinking about the full kind of scope of the story and some of the stuff that I had not, I guess, talked about, and just how so many different things were connected. And I don't know, I had the urge to tell this whole story. It's kind of long, but I promise it's worth it if you listen to the whole thing. It kind of starts in 2011, I guess. I was working in Muskogee at that point, at the Muskogee Phoenix, and I just switched for the first time to being a news reporter. I'd worked in sports, kind of accidentally fell into it, and that was the only thing I knew how to do. So I did sports for a long time, and in 2010, I got a job on the news desk, not writing, but working in the news department in Muskogee. And end of October, I think 2011 is when I switched to being a news reporter. And it was so hard. It was like crazy. It's funny looking back because I was so confident writing sports stories, and then I would write these news stories and I had no idea what I was doing. And it was even harder really because I was transitioning from the desk to writing, but I had to train my replacements on the desk. And so some days, some weeks I might work one day as a reporter and 4 days on the desk, and it's hard to, you don't have a beat when you're only working 1 day a week or 2 days a week. So I kind of just would sit at my desk and whatever stories, kind of fell into my lap would work on. So I just didn't know what I was doing. And I'd been doing it about a month, and I was at home, and this was like right before Thanksgiving. If I looked the date up, I could remember. It had to be Thanksgiving week. And I was at home in my apartment with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. And I got a phone call from our city editor late that night. It might have been even Thanksgiving Day. I don't remember. It was around Thanksgiving for sure. And it might have been Thanksgiving Day because I might have just been on call, and that's why they called me to do the story. But anyway, it was 9 or 10 p.m. and I got a call from the city editor saying, there's been a shooting at this address. I think it was on Chandler. And if you know Muskogee, you know Chandler. And there had been a shooting. I needed to go out. She was at home listening to the scanner, and she'd heard it. So I jumped in my car, told my girlfriend, hey, I'll be back in a little bit. Jumped in my car and drove down there. And I pulled up to the house, and there were police everywhere. I mean, it was just chaos. Neighbors outside and people crying. I remember there was a woman laying on the sidewalk crying. And it was just, I'd never been in an environment like that. I mean, you're covering like high school sports. You don't see, stuff like this. And so I remember I walked up to the house. I just had no idea what to do. I walked up to the house, and there were some cops standing around, and I asked, it was late, at night. I asked this cop, hey, can you tell me, I'm from the paper, can you tell me anything that's going on? And I remember he looked at me, and he looked at me and he frowned, and he just said, just call the PIO. And the thing about the PIO, I hope, he actually thinks, the former PIO there in Muskogee follows me on Twitter. I hope he sees this. No offense to him. He's a nice guy, but he was not, he would leave work every day at 4 o'clock, and he would not answer his phone after that. And so it's 10 p.m. and they're telling you to call the PIO, you're not going to get anything out of him until the next day. So I was kind of looking at this cop like, we all know this guy's not answering the phone. There's no one here who can tell me anything that happened, and cops wouldn't talk to me, and they didn't know me. They didn't know who I was. I just started. I remember I went to there was a family of neighbors kind of huddled in a group, and I walked up to their porch to, hey, did you hear anything or see anything, and they just turned around as a group and walked inside, didn't say a word to me. And so it's kind of like flummoxed, and I understood it was I'd heard from somehow, maybe my city editor had told me that it was a young male who'd been shot, and people think drugs and guns and gangs and stuff, especially in Muskogee when that happens. And so, I understood people didn't want to talk to me and didn't want to get in the middle of it, but I was trying to figure out what's going on, and I was honestly not very good at my job, and I was nervous that I was going to go back and I was going to screw this up, and I wasn't going to do a good job, and everyone was going to hate me. And so I really wanted some information. So I'm trying to talk to anyone who'll talk to me, and no one would say anything. So finally I had to give up, the scene kind of cleared. I went back to the office, and I was going to write what I had, and I wrote what I knew. And I remember I'd heard the kid's name who'd been shot and killed, and but that was really all I knew. And I wrote down what I had, and I looked at it, and I was like, this is, I'm going to get yelled at. And I remember that was the thing. I was just like, oh man, I hate getting griped at about not doing a good enough job. I just was so stressed out worrying about it. And so I was sitting at my desk, and it was late at night. I think it was actually Thanksgiving night, now that I think about it. And I remember sitting there and just being like, I got to figure this out. I got to make this better before I turn this story over. It was like, I had like 6 inches. And I remember I thought the kid's last name that I'd heard was kind of a distinctive last name. And I remember thinking, in Muskogee, there can't be too many of these guys with this last name. I'll just get the phone book and I'll call them all, and I'll see if I can reach someone who, an uncle or somebody who knows who this kid and can say something, just to flesh the story out a little bit. So I called a couple and no one answered, and finally someone picked the phone up. And I remember just being like, hey, look, I'm a reporter for the newspaper. Sorry for calling so late. If this doesn't have anything to do with you, I apologize. You can hang up on me, but I'm trying to reach the family or someone who knows this kid who was shot today, and just trying to find someone who can tell me something about him for the paper, because they wanted it in the paper the next day. And I remember there was an older guy who answered, and he said, yeah, that was my grandson. And I said, oh, hey, well, I'm sorry to bother you, but if there's anything, I remember kind of telling him, like, look, I don't have much in this story except that teenager was shot and killed during a home invasion. So, people are going to jump to conclusions. They're going to kind of build their own conclusions based on that. So whatever you want people to know about your grandson that they wouldn't otherwise know from reading, what I have, tell me. So he starts kind of telling me he's a good kid. I remember he said he was his parents were sort of troubled, and he was sort of troubled, but his parents, they meant well, and he tried really hard, and he was a good kid, and he really, he cared about his friends and his family. And I think he was really close to his grandfather, which was, sort of obviously helpful for me to get a hold of this guy, because he could kind of tell me a little bit about him. And then I remember he started, so this is, hours after the shooting, 3 or 4 hours after. And so the granddad transitions into telling me, he starts going, well, yeah, it was a home invasion, and these guys, they were young, they were teenagers, and they held my grandson and his friends at gunpoint, and they were pistol whipping him and beating them with baseball bats. And I remember all these details, and I was like typing it out, and then I realized, like, I don't know does he realize that he's telling me this? Is he telling me this on purpose? So I kind of like, I cut him off a little bit and said, hey, just transparency. Do you want this in the paper? Because I'm taking notes, and it's on the record. And the guy, yeah, it's fine. He told me. And so, okay. So now I'm like, oh, I got these details, for the story. My editors are going to love it. I was so excited because I thought, oh my God, it was really my first, I succeeded at my job. The first time I thought I'd done, a good job. And so I wrote the story out, and we still had time to get it in the next day's paper. So I called my city editor, and I had emailed her the story. I called my city editor. This is what it's like to work in community news. I called her and said, hey, I sent you the story. We've got 30 minutes. If you can look at it, I'll get it on the website, and I'll get it sent over to the press room so they can put it in the paper. And she said, you got to send it to our other editor, because she said, I don't have the internet at my house, which that's what it's like working at a small town newspaper. And so I sent the story to the other editor, and he gave it the okay and sent it back, and we got it in the paper. I remember we got it in the paper, and I got it on the website, and I remember feeling so accomplished when I left work that night. Like, I did not screw this up. I actually did a good job. Everyone's gonna be so proud of me. I just thought, oh my God, I'm gonna come in tomorrow. I was standing ovations for me. What an incredible job I'd done. And I walked in the office the next day, and I sat down at my desk, and as soon as I sat down at my desk, my phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was this guy from the police department. His name was Bobby Lee, and Bobby Lee was the lieutenant, which meant he was basically the director of the investigations division, which was like 2 detectives, one of whom is actually in prison now, which is another story I should probably tell at some point. But so I answered the phone and said, it's Dylan with the Muskogee Phoenix. And I hear, this is Bobby Lee with the Muskogee Police Department. And I just want you to know, you ruined our whole case. And I am thinking, I'm on a high still. I'm thinking I did a great job. And now he's telling me that I ruined the case. And I was like, what? And he's like, we're never going to be able to get a conviction. You put all those details in the story, and it's in the paper. We'll never get a conviction. We'll never get a jury. You ruined it. You screwed the whole thing up. He's cussing me out. He just chewed me out. And I'm sitting there on the phone like, oh God, what have I done? And for the record, they did get a conviction, and it was fine. I didn't actually screw the case up, but he was just very upset with me. He was giving it to me. And I remember he kept saying, whenever these guys who killed this kid go free, you have to apologize to the family because it's your fault. You screwed it up, which was, that was heavyweight, for me to hear. So I told my editor, I went to my city editor, and I said, oh, it's Bobby Lee. He's mad at me. And I remember my city editor had, she knew all these guys because she had gone to high school with all of them. And so she's like, yeah, and I remember she said, she was like, yeah, I probably wouldn't have put that stuff in the story if I was you, the details about the guns and the baseball bats or whatever. And I was like, I remember thinking like, well, that would have been, useful to know last night. If you had the internet, maybe you could have told me and kept me out of trouble. So that day ended, and like I said, it ended up being okay. They caught the kids who did it. It ended up being the kid and his friends were known to they just smoked a lot of weed basically, and they were known to have weed in the house. And some kids knew that they had weed, and they thought we'll steal the marijuana from them, and held him at gunpoint. This kid was just talking. I mean, the story was that he was just talking too much, and they shot him and killed him. He's just kind of mouthing off, and so they did get convictions. I didn't ruin that case, but that shooting happened. It was the first one I'd covered, and the hardest part for me starting out as a news reporter was just staring at a story and not knowing who to call, and what exactly needed to be in the story. You've got to do it multiple times. This repetition helps, and I had not been able to do as the first shooting I'd ever covered, so I didn't know what to do, and I just remember being really stressed out the whole time. And the thing about Muskogee is it has this reputation for like crime and violence, but it's really, they would go years sometimes without a homicide, and usually even one a year max. And I remember that was the first one that year, I think. And then like within 2 weeks there were 2 more fatal shootings, and but both of those times I was furloughed. We were taking furlough days at that point, and so both those shootings I was furloughed that day. Someone else had to cover the shootings. I covered kind of the aftermath, which was helpful. Criminal charges and arrests, and just dealing with all of that and kind of figuring that process out. I covered that for those shootings, but the next 2 shootings I did not cover when they happened. And so now that there's 3 shootings in like 2 weeks, which was very unusual for Muskogee, and it was kind of a big deal. And then I remember one night, this was maybe 10-15 days before Christmas. So you're thinking one shooting is like Thanksgiving, and this one's 2 or 3 weeks later, and this is the 4th one in like 3 weeks. And I remember getting a call from a guy at the police department. It was late that night, and he said, hey, just so you know, there was another fatal shooting. This time it was a 2-year-old who was shot and killed. And but it's too late to do anything. It's like 11 p.m. And so I was like, oh, okay. So I called my editor, and he was like, we'll just get to it tomorrow. So the next day I went into the office, and I said, hey, there was a shooting last night. The 2-year-old was shot and killed. We really need to get on the story. And then I remember my city editor was like, well, I'll go with you and show you how it's done, kind of flexing on me because I guess I, had screwed that first one up. And she was like, I'll go with you. We'll I'll show you the ropes. And I remember we got in our car and we drove to the house where the shooting had happened. And I remember it was not really in the best neighborhood. And as we were pulling up, and I remember I could see she was getting nervous. She was driving, and she was kind of getting like uncomfortable, not nervous really, but just uncomfortable. And we pulled into the house, and there were no cars in the driveway. And we really didn't know if that was the right, I just thought that was the right house. So we thought we had the right address, but there were no cars in the driveway. And she said, oh, it doesn't look like anyone's here. Let's just go. And I remember thinking like, well, we drove all the way here. I'll go, at least let me go leave a, business card or something. I remember I knocked on the door. No one answered. I left. I actually didn't have business cards. We obviously couldn't afford that. And I wrote my information down on a piece of paper and kind of jammed it in the door. And as we were walking back to her car, another car pulled up, and then a whole family got out. And I remember it was like, 10 people kind of walking together, different ages, older or younger, little kids. And I thought, well, this has got to be the family. They're all together. And they did not look super happy to see us, but I was like, this has got to be the family. So I was like, okay, they're here. And then I remember my city editor was like, like I said, they didn't seem too happy to see us, so I don't necessarily blame her. But I remember she was like, well, I think we've got enough. We can leave them alone. And I was like, we don't have anything. Like, we don't have even, we don't even know if this is the right house, if these are the right people. It's like, I'll just go ask them. So I went up, I said, look, hey, obviously we're the paper. We're just trying to do a story, trying to get some details. If anyone wants to talk, that, I'd love to chat if you want, to call instead. My number's on the door. And they said, oh yeah, come inside, it's fine, you can talk to us. So we go inside, which I just remember being like, this was the first time, they were just so gracious with us. And I remember this was the first time the weight of covering, a fatal shooting really hit me, because it was like, and we walked in the house and it was fresh. I mean, it was, it happened, I don't know, 12 hours before. And so there were still bullet holes in the wall. I remember it was really jarring, because you're thinking of a 2-year-old shot and killed. And there was the carpet, there was an empty spot in the carpet where the cops had cut out a section where the kid had laid and bled on the floor, and they'd cut it out with a box knife. So there's bullet holes in the wall. There's this empty spot on the carpet, which you just couldn't, your eyes were just drawn to. And it was all next to the Christmas tree, and there were presents. And I just remember being, I can't believe that these people are strong enough to talk to us, honestly. And they were really open with us, and they talked to us for a long time, and we got a lot of pictures. And I remember just being like, wow, like that was really, I just couldn't believe that they were so gracious to speak to us, And the story was that the night before, it was a family that all lived together, grandparents, the kids, and then the grandkids. And the grandparents were younger. They were probably in their 40s. It was a young family. Mom and of the 2-year-old was like 19 or 20, 2-year-old kid. There were little kids running around too in the house. So, but it was young. It was a young family, and the story was that someone had broken into the house that night, and the grandmother, who, like I said, we're not talking about a 70-year-old woman. She was in her 40s. Saw it happening. Saw the door kicked in or whatever, and she said she ran and she slammed the door. Well, she slammed the door. The gunman had his arm in the, I don't know if you can picture it, but had his arm. He was behind the door, but had his arm in the house and had a gun. And so she slammed the door on his arm really hard. And she said that his arm was stuck in the door. So he was shooting the gun, just kind of waving the gun around, shooting, trying to hit her so she would let go of the door so he could leave. And a stray bullet hit the 2-year-old and killed the Jason Logan was his name, killed the 2-year-old. So they tell us this, and we go back to the office and call the police, and they give us some more detail, and we write the story up. And I remember it wasn't too much longer after that interview, after that shooting, that they hit on a suspect. And I remember seeing, hey, we're looking for a guy. I remember the name was Albert Meeks, and they called him Lee. His middle name was Lee. They called him Lee Meeks. And they said, we're looking for Lee Meeks. He's the suspect. And then I got a call not that much longer, it may have been the same night, from a source of the police department there in Muskogee, who told me that, hey, we've arrested him. He actually went to Tulsa and turned himself in Tulsa, and they're bringing him to Muskogee. But we've got the gunman. So they arrest him, and everyone. This was like, 4 shootings in 3 weeks or something, and the last one is a 2-year-old. And the community there were rallies and community meetings and police patrols and all. It was kind of a big deal, for Muskogee, what was going on. And that shooting in particular, people were like, it's gotta stop. The first shooting, like I said, was drug related. The 2 in between, one was a guy, it was a robbery. He had won some money at the casino, and someone shot him and killed him and tried to take I think he'd bought some rims with the money from the casino, and they stole his rims. And then the other one was, I don't remember what the third one was, but I remember the guy who was shot was one of the kids who was involved in the mall shooting in Muskogee in 2010. And so, there was those shootings, people were not as up in arms about. They didn't, they weren't the most, they didn't look at them as like sympathetic victims, but a 2-year-old, obviously. So the 2-year-old dies, and everyone's kind of like, this has got to stop, And so they really, the Meeks kid who they arrested, he was 21. I remember it's his birthday the night of the shooting. And, they were coming down hard on him. And it was just like, this guy on his birthday, he chooses to spend his 21st birthday murdering a 2-year-old. And it was a big deal. And so that actually that was the end of the violence for a long. I don't think there was another shooting for maybe more than a year, another fatal shooting for more than a year in Muskogee. And they arrested Meeks, and he went to jail. And the deal about, a lot of you probably know this, but maybe some of you don't, you sometimes don't get a bail, oftentimes you don't get a bail set for you if you are charged with murder. And so this guy didn't get a bond, and he goes into jail, and he can't get out. And he was in jail for 18 months between that shooting and his trial. And, and I just remember, and I actually, gosh, this is even a crazier part of the story. He was in there for so long that I went to another call. This had to be like 6 or 7 months later, and I remember it was a crazy. I mean, it was like a pregnant pedestrian hit by a car intentionally in this neighborhood, and I got there, and it was like, just people everywhere, and cops didn't know what was going on. And I was just trying to figure out if anyone's seen anything. I saw these neighbors, they were younger, and I went to ask them, hey, did you guys see anything? Can you tell me what's going on? Because I'm getting all these conflicting stories. And I remember they were these younger kids, younger, and like they were 18, 19, 20, 21, something like that age. And they come up to talk to me, and I'm thinking, okay, great, maybe they saw something. And then I'm like, why are they getting in a circle around me? And I'm like, kind of like uneasy, like what's going on? And then they said, hey, you need to write in the paper that Lee Meeks is innocent. And I was like, what? And they're getting close. I mean, one guy in particular was getting really close to my face, and he's like kind of pointing at my face, you need to say that Lee Meeks is innocent. And I was like, I remember being like, oh, what do you mean? I didn't say that he's guilty. But because, this is just sort of like people not understanding how news works or journalism works. I said, I didn't say he was guilty. I'm saying that the police think he's guilty. The DA thinks he's guilty. But that's not what we're saying in the paper. I can't say that he's guilty or innocent or he did it or didn't do it. If you look at every story, it says allegedly, arrested for allegedly shooting a 2-year-old, but that's just how it works. And what was funny was I really thought that I was going to get my ass beat. And I ended up talking him down, and we all kind of came to this understanding of how journalism works. I don't know, it was kind of interesting. But yeah, that story went on for so long. We wrote so much, and he was really made out to be this, this villain. And I remember going to his trial, and they really wanted me to cover that trial really hard. I was there for like jury selection, everything. And I remember going to the trial thinking that I just never had considered, honestly, and this is a failure on my part, and I probably should not have been a news reporter at this point with this brain of mine, but I remember I never considered the fact that like the criminal justice system might not work, super well. And I just was like, this guy got arrested, he got charged, obviously they're not doing that. They don't think that he did it. If there's not strong evidence, you wouldn't just throw someone in jail for 18 months for killing a 2-year-old if you didn't know that he did it. So I anticipated going to this trial, 3 or 4 days, murder trial, guilty, life sentence. I don't think that should have tipped me off. They weren't seeking the death penalty for a guy who killed a 2-year-old. But I thought I'm going to go see this guilty verdict. So the trial starts, and if you have not seen the other videos or the rest of this video, this is the part you should listen to because it's just insane. So the trial starts, and within a couple of hours, I'm like, this guy's innocent. And I'm really, I don't know if it's a strength or a weakness, but when I cover a trial, I just go back and forth. A lot of times, if there's a defense witness, I'm like, oh my God, this guy's innocent. And then there's a prosecution witness, and I'm like, oh, he's guilty. And then another defense witness, and I'm like, oh no, he's innocent. But this was like, it was cut and dry. And I remember being like, when they were doing jury selection, and I remember thinking that something was off, because if you've ever covered a murder trial or paid attention to them, high-profile murder trials, it's usually the DA himself or herself who does the trial because they want the verdict and they want a campaign off of it. They want their face in the thing. I've seen this. The DA at the time was a guy named Larry Moore. He would carry a gun into the courtroom. And there's stories about Tim Harris here in Tulsa County doing gang trials with a bulletproof vest on. It's a big production whenever there's a big murder trial. And so, but it wasn't Larry Moore doing the trial. It was another ADA, assistant district attorney, who, again, no offense to this guy, but he was the worst one of their assistant district attorneys. There was some good. There was a guy named Dan Medlock there. He was really good. I remember Nikki Baker was an ADA, and she was really good. And this guy was just, he was just inexperienced, and he kind of, so much of being a prosecutor is being able to project competence, and he would stutter around, and he would mispronounce words, or he would stumble. And I just thought, why are they giving this guy this murder trial? Well, obviously they were giving it to him. I thought either they're giving it to him because it's such a layup that they want him to have an easy victory in a big case, or there's something wrong with the case and none of them want to take it, and they're sticking it with the guy who they know is not going to be doing this job for very much longer. And the trial started, and within 2 hours I was like, oh my God, this guy's, it's not even something to debate. Like, he's obviously innocent. And the reason that you knew he was innocent, I swear to God, this happened. The star witness for the defense was Elbert Meek's female cousin. And she had this look on her face like, I can't believe I have to do this. And I can't remember who his attorney was, but I remember his attorney was like kind of leading her into this discussion. And she was looking like, I just can't believe I have to do it. You know, I have to say this. And what ended up saving him from prison is that, like I said, it was his 21st birthday when this shooting happened. And that they were like, what a terrible person murdering a 2-year-old on his 21st birthday. Well, what he was really doing on his 21st birthday was he was drunk at home on his laptop on Facebook Messenger, messaging his cousin, trying to convince her to hook up with him. And they had all the messages, all the Facebook messages, time-stamped, obviously, and they knew they came from that laptop, and they were trying to make it sound like, well, maybe he was walking 5 miles from his house to this other house, carrying the laptop, messaging his cousin, trying to hook up with her, murders a 2-year-old, walks back home with the laptop. Like, it just made no sense. And you could tell the jury was like, what in the hell? And when that was it, basically, that was the whole trial. And this woman, the cousin starts speaking. They have the transcripts of the text or the Facebook messages, and then the trial was just over. And the jury deliberated for I don't think it was even 30 minutes. And they came back and they said, he's innocent. They acquitted him. And I remember he fell on the ground. He was crying, 18 months. If you've ever been in the Muskogee County Jail, it's not a place you want to spend 18 consecutive months. And not only is he out of jail, but he's also, he'd been in jail as a baby killer for 18 months. And now he's innocent. And I remember he was on the ground crying. And I don't remember if the kid's family who was killed, if his family was there still or not. I mean, I think they kind of knew where it was, the direction it was heading. And the thing that bothered me the most, and this has stuck with me ever since, is if you ever covered one of these murder trials, a lot of the times all the ADAs will come watch the verdict come in. So they're there were chairs by the door, 5 or 6 chairs, and they were all the ADAs were in those chairs watching this verdict. And so they give the innocent verdict, they acquit him, and it's kind of chaos. Everyone's in and out trying to get out of the courtroom. Well, I've got to go out to interview family and get photos and all this stuff. So I'm trying to get out first. And I'm standing next to those ADAs who are sitting down as the prosecutor, the ADA who had tried the case, was walking past them. And he just looked at them. And I remember he said, hey, I tried my best, but it was just a bad case. And I was like, I can't. And it just hit me in that moment that they had let that guy who they knew was innocent sit in jail for 18 months. No other investigations being done. They let him sit in jail for 18 months knowing he was innocent and still tried to send him to prison for life, even though it was obvious that he didn't do it. I mean, it took the jury 20 minutes to decide that he was innocent. And I just was like, I couldn't believe that it was that corrupt that they would, and he wasn't a good guy. He's been arrested. I think he may be in prison again, now. But it was just like, it's been 18 months where the guy who actually killed the 2-year-old is further away from being caught now, and you've had this guy who didn't do it in jail for 18 months, and you tried to send him to prison for life anyway. It was just, I don't know, it was crazy. It just really made me, I was just really upset. And then to hear the guy say, well, I tried. Like, what did you try? Like, you tried to send an innocent person to prison? Like, I don't know. That was eye-opening for me. And, eventually, a few years later, the story about what happened, I remember when they identified Lee Meeks as a suspect, I remember being like, well, how did you identify him as a suspect? And they told me that the grandmother who had slammed the door on the shooter had described, the shooter, 21, black, kind of short hair, and but it had only described him. And then one of the other family members said, that sounds like Lee Meeks. And then the police pulled his picture up and they said, wow, that description does look like him. And they put out that's when they named him as a suspect, and he drove to Tulsa and was arrested, and all that happened. So the story about how that happened later came out that the family, they didn't know who it was, and they didn't know who shot the kid, and they didn't know who was trying to break into the house. But they did have, if you know anything about Muskogee, they have gangs, but they don't have gangs in the sense of like Tulsa, you've got the Hoover Crips and whatever. In Muskogee, it's more families where everyone has, it's people with the same last name. And some of the families mix and intermingle with each other, but like, I remember the Andersons are a family, and there's these well-known families that deal drugs and guns or whatever. And so what ended up happening was they didn't know who the guy was who had tried to break in the house. They didn't know who the guy was who shot the 2-year-old, but they did know that they did not like Lee Meeks. So they sort of just said, well, they kind of described him, led police to him, police arrest him, he gets acquitted. And it turns out that it's, I think 5 years later, no, not quite that long, maybe 4 years later, they finally did make an arrest in that case. And they arrested the real guy who had shot the 2-year-old. And it was someone who the family, it sounded to me like the family even knew that it maybe could have been him. He was an ex of a daughter or someone and I think he had shown up at the house to try to kill her. And obviously things had gone wrong. But yeah, that was just such a crazy, I remember that story, as much as anything I think that I've done or seen in journalism, pushed me into criminal justice reporting and just the type of like accountability stuff that we do, because it just felt so wrong. I just couldn't believe that happened so easily for everyone, that it was just, we tried to send an innocent person to prison, and it just didn't work out. I just couldn't believe it. And so anyway, I know that's a long story. I think it's probably been about 30 minutes since I started telling this, but that's just, it's a story of Oklahoma journalism and the criminal justice system, the whole thing. A small paper, our technology doesn't work, people don't have the internet, the cops are arresting the wrong people, the PIOs don't work past 3:45. I don't know. That story just stuck with me, and I started thinking of the whole scope of it yesterday, and I thought, man, I should tell this all in one place because it's just such a crazy story. But that's how the system works. It's how it still works sometimes. Not everyone, obviously, who's arrested and charged is innocent, and they're not all guilty. And it's just a good reminder, I think, to not play out, guilt and innocence before hearing evidence. Don't let the cops tell you that someone's guilty and just be like, yeah, they're guilty, because they are not always. And there's tons, it's not always their fault. I don't think the cops even knew. The DA issues a charge and they arrest the guy. But there's a lot of ways that cases like that can go wrong. And a lot of things happened that led to that. And it just, I don't know, it was so ugly. It just really changed the entire way I viewed journalism and criminal justice and everything. So anyway, if you listen to that whole story, I applaud you. Thank you.